Hey, Life Group Leader, welcome back to our weekly leadership podcast. I'm excited to be talking with you today about Colossians 1 15 through 23. It is one of my favorite passages in the entire Bible because it is one that just so clearly just elevates the person of Jesus Christ. I mean, it is just chock full of just beautiful pictures about who Jesus is, what he has done, both from the beginning of time to now, and what he will do in the future. We're really going to be looking at this and diving into really the theme of this letter, which is that Christ is supreme. There's been some teaching going around in the church of Colossae that was diminishing the person and work of Jesus Christ. And in fact, every false teaching that exists in some way diminishes the person of Jesus Christ. So as Christ is elevated as supreme, as being the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity who took on flesh and dwelt among us, as he is lifted up as supreme, the truth of the gospel goes out. So we're going to be looking at this passage. There's a lot of things in there. Just want to highlight one confusing phrase in this text. It says the firstborn of creation. This is a phrase that sometimes that people have taken out of context and try to surprise, surprise, diminish the person of Jesus Christ, saying that he is somehow of a lesser degree than the Father. And what this term means, clearly it does not mean that he is created, because just in a few words, it says, by him all things were created. So if all things were created by him, then he is not created. In heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. So Jesus himself is not a created being. He has eternally existed with the Father. The Father, the Son, and the Spirit have existed for eternity past and will exist into eternity future, having no beginning and no end. Jesus is eternal because he is God. And so he is not created, but he is given a rank above creation. He is of a different order. He is uncreated, we are created. Everything else in the world, in the universe, either invisible or visible, are created. But God, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit are uncreated. They are of a different order than we are, than the angels are, than even the most powerful of angelic beings, either be it Satan or some other angels that we see in the Scriptures. They are all of a different order, namely that they are created, while Christ, the Father, and the Spirit are uncreated because they are God. There is one God who has eternally existed in three persons. Jesus is the second member of that triune God. So that's a confusing phrase in it, but we want to be talking about just have some time just to talk about who Jesus is and who this text reveals Jesus to be. Gives you a good time to talk about the importance of theology, or in this case, Christology, which is the study of who Jesus is, because what we believe about who God is the most important thing about us. What we believe about God is the most practical thing about us, because our beliefs about God lead to a worship of God, which leads to a reflection of an image. So if we believe the right things about God, we will have a proper worship of God, which will lead to a proper reflection of God in creation. But when we believe bad things about God, when we suppress the truth about who God is, then we begin to worship idols and reflect their shameful, less glorious image. And that's the picture we see in Romans 1. That's what we see in Genesis 3. As Adam begins to worship a false god, when he begins to believe a bad thing about who God is, that he's not truthful, he begins to commit himself to the serpent, the enemy, rather than the living God. And then he begins to reflect that same deceptive nature of the enemy in his first actions. He hides, he blames, he's trying to be deceptive towards God. We just see that what we believe about God affects how we worship God, and how we worship God reflects the image is how we worship God is what image that we reflect. So if we're worshiping the living God, we're going to reflect his image. If we're worshiping a false god, we're going to reflect the lesser image of the idol. So we're going to make sure we're just taking some time just discussing some of these things. I mean, he is supreme. He's superior. He is the head of the church. He is the reconciler. He is the fullness of God dwelt in him bodily. He is the God made flesh. I mean, there's just so much rich things about who he is. And we also just see a great picture of the gospel. And just a good reminder that, hey, we were all once alienated from him, but it is through Christ that we have been reconciled. And we see a kind of a trajectory. We were unreconciled, we were reconciled by Christ, and then we see in Paul, who now is becoming a minister of that same reconciliation. We see this again in 2 Corinthians 5, as Devin so greatly pointed out in this lesson. So, as we're studying this text, I want us to just to focus in on the person of Jesus Christ, talk about him, and let this, one of the applications of this text is simply just to worship Jesus, to fall on your face before him in praise and in worship. So take some time maybe to offer praise up to him in the form of a prayer as a group. And then just talk about how, reflecting back on our time from when we were alienated from Christ, but now have we been redeemed and reconciled by the blood of his Christ, and that we have peace with God through that, and now we have an opportunity to carry that ministry of reconciliation towards other people. So I hope you're having a great week. I hope this lesson has just been a great week for you studying and just preparing for it, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys on Sunday. So have a great week, and I'll see you then.